Welcome to Backstage with Becca with special guest James Gish. Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Backstage with Becca. On this episode, he's been seen on the national tour of Les Miserables, where he understudied Enjolras, the national tour of Beautiful, the Carole King musical, where he played Jerry, made his Broadway debut as Fiero in Wicked, and recently finished performing an encore's production of The Light in the Piazza at New York City Center, where he played Fabrizio. Please welcome James Gish. Hi.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Great, I'm great. Thanks for having me today.
Of course, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah.
It's been a crazy couple, I imagine, months for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's been wonderful, but yes, it's been a lot.
So, first of all, I actually want to ask about The Light in the Piazza at New York City Center that you just finished. So, how was it? What was your experience like? How long is the rehearsal process for like that kind of show?
So, everybody warned me when I got the job. They said it's sort of like being shot out of a cannon and you just need to be as prepared as you possibly can before you get in the room. And I'm so glad that they told me that, because it is very much like, okay, and today we'll be staging act one. And you're like, what? You know what I mean? So it's fast and furious. And we spent the first couple days just working on music, and Adam Gettle came in on day two to coach Anna, the girl who played Clara, and I. So we each got a couple hours with him, and that was really fantastic. I mean, I've been lucky enough to work with a lot of fantastic people, but there were things that Adam Gettle said to me that I still don't understand after all this time. He is such a genius. And I remember going up to one of the other music directors in the show and being like, am I an idiot for not understanding some of that? And he was like, no, I didn't get half of it either. And I was like, oh, thank God. I mean, he just exists. He's so brilliant. So yeah, I mean, rehearsals were wonderful. It was great. It was extremely fast, but I will say, I feel like we got really lucky because our cast was just so welcoming and warm. I mean, they were, for how little time we spent together, one of the most bonded casts I think I've been a part of. And I think some of that, it comes from the simple fact that it's such a fast process. You sort of just have to embrace one another or you'll lose your mind and start crying. You know what I mean? Because it's a high stakes job. The whole industry comes to see you, but it's incredible. And I think that intimidated me a lot before we started, but once we got in front of that first audience, I was like, oh man, we're freaking rock stars, because it's all the industry people, so they get it, and so they were just the most supportive audiences I possibly could have imagined, and I don't think we expected people to find Piazza funny, because we were never in the rehearsal room. We didn't really laugh at our own stuff. We didn't really think what we were doing was humorous. And then we got in front of people and they were laughing. And it was kind of like,
Oh, okay.
you know what I mean? It felt really good. And yeah, it was a really wonderful experience. And also, and I know this is a very long answer to a pretty
No, all good.
But New York City Center also, and I kept telling everybody there that I met, like, I could not believe that. So Italian.
Still in the mindset.
I could not believe that they have assembled such a wonderful group of people who work in that building, like from company management to the ushers to front of house to everybody. Like, I don't think I met a single person who wasn't entirely warm and welcoming the whole time.
Yes.
Everybody's so happy to be there and to be doing what they're doing, and they're all so passionate about what they do. And all I can say is thank God that they're that way, because if it wasn't like that, I don't know how encores would even happen. You know what I mean? Because it is so fast and furious. So yeah,
that's what makes it such like a successful company, and
right.
Like they put on productions that are successful over and over again, and if people are wondering why, then that tidbit is definitely why.
Yeah, no, it's pretty sensational, and like, oh, holy crap, I got to bow next to Ruthie Ann Miles. Like, she held my hand, like, what?
Still not over that.
Not over it. And she was so, just unbelievably good, and it was funny because she was just being very careful during rehearsal. So she wore a mask for a lot of rehearsals just to stay safe and everything, and so I feel like we never really got to see what she was doing until we were like doing it. And I don't know about anybody else, but I was like, oh my God. Like once I could actually see her face, I was like, oh Jesus. I was like, I'm gonna cry, you know? Yeah.
So starstruck.
Right, truly.
So you talked about like it's a fast rehearsal process, so that's a challenge even of itself. But
Yeah.
it's also only a 5-day run. So how do you go about selling the show as a cast to an audience in a city as big as New York is?
You know, I'd say City Center, they really have it down to a science. You know, we had a press day about a week or a week and a half into rehearsals where it really was just like a step and repeat. They had like Broadway World and Theater Mania and Theaterly and Playbill. And like each one had a representative and a photographer and a camera guy. And it was like they each had like these little 2-foot backdrops behind them. And it was like, now you talk to this one, you step 2 feet, and now you talk to this one. And now, so it was like in half an hour, you did all the publicity for the show all at once, you know? And yeah, that was pretty fun. And then there were people who took videos of us at Zitz Probe and posted those. And like on our first night at our invited dress, which here's the thing. They call it an invited dress because it's the final dress rehearsal. It's a full performance. Like there were at least 1,000 people there for the invited dress. Yeah, no, it was like maybe a 2/3 full audience. And nobody told me that until like right before we did it. And it was just a shock. And then we got out there and they were the best audience we had all week, you know, because it was all industry people then, you know what I mean? So, and they knew that we were all petrified, you know what I mean? Because here we are about to run the show for the first time and we're going to do it in front of like some of the, like Josh Groban was there that night. Lin-Manuel was there that night. Like, yeah, it was like people like that. And thank God I did not know, or I would have fully shat myself on that stage if I had been aware that people like that were in the, oh man. So yeah, it was very special though.
That's insane to like have. When do you figure that out? Like that those people are in the audience?
Not until after. And then like, because we went to the stage door and like, I remember Lin-Manuel was like inside the building, inside the stage door. So he wouldn't get with his mother. So like he wouldn't get hounded by people, you know? And so he was waiting to meet some of us, I guess, you know, and I'm sure he wanted to meet Ruthie. And I mean, that was really, he had really wonderful stuff to say, which was cool. And then he followed me on Instagram the next morning and I wanted to frame it. I was like, I want to print a screenshot and I want to frame it over my bed. So when I go to sleep at night, I see Lin-Manuel following, you know what I mean?
You should frame it.
Right, I know. But no, it was just, no, it was incredible. And you were like, I was just at the stage and I was like, oh my God, that's Stephen Pasquale. And I was like, oh my God, you know, and like, yeah, it was nuts.
Oh my gosh. It's like the scene in Tick Tick Boom where like everyone arrives at the diner.
Yes, it was that. It was literally that, you know, and like Donna Murphy and like, oh man, it was just, yeah, it was overwhelming. Yeah, and like Donna Murphy messaged me on Instagram. We were going back and forth and I was like, I cannot believe that this is freaking happening right now. And so it was terrifying, you know what I mean, to be in front of all those people, but it was so wonderful. And I remember telling everybody, because I'm big about this, I'm like, I can't know who's out there. Like if you tell me a name, you know what I mean, of someone that I know or know of, I am going to think about that name for the show. And every choice I make.
Just so many iconic people in the mix of
really things. It was really special. I was so unbelievably lucky to get to do it, you know, and I'm still kind of like trying to wrap my head around just how special that was.
And I do want to ask, because every time I ask people what show that they would revive on Broadway, I feel like a popular answer is The Light in the Piazza.
Yeah.
So what do you think would make this production of The Light in the Piazza a great production to take to a Broadway stage for an extended period of time?
Well, I think one thing that's very interesting, I mean, I think the best thing about this production was their casting of AAPI actors in the leading female roles, you know? And I think the best part of what they did with it is Jay, our director, he's freaking brilliant. He chose like these wonderful moments to address that nuance, that extra layer in the show, but he also didn't make the entire show about it. You know what I mean? Like he just was like, we're going to have these wonderful actors of color in this show and just allow them to, we're going to acknowledge it, you know what I mean? And it's going to change the coloring of the nuance and the tone of certain moments, but we're then going to just let them exist as human beings. You know what I mean? And I don't know, that was really, really wonderful. And I think people had a very strong reaction to that. And then I would also say just having Ruthie at the helm did so much, and if it gets revived, she has to do it. She absolutely, there is no show without Ruthie, you know.
Yes, and I feel like people just discovered Anna's talent.
She's unbelievable. She's 19 years old. She was
Yeah.
a freshman in college last year, and her voice is as strong as literally any female singer I've ever heard in her vocal type. I mean, she's unbelievable. I remember singing with her in the callback and being like, "Who? What? How? Who is? Wow!" Yeah, it was nuts. It was nuts.
I saw her in the Los Angeles production like 5 years ago when she was like 14, and she sang
What show?
and For the Record, Love Actually.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And she sang like one song,
Uh-huh.
one Christmas song, and I was like, oh my gosh, this girl is gonna be huge.
Yeah, she's also, in addition to just being prodigiously talented, she is, first of all, she's the coolest, but she kept up because she's 19, and like all these people are everyone in that cast is so seasoned, it's unbelievable. People who have originated so many shows on Broadway, you know what I mean? And so it was so intimidating. And here comes this 19-year-old, and she keeps up, if just as quick, if not faster than everybody else. I cannot tell you how many times our music director, Rob Berman, would be like, okay, guys, that was good. That was good. James, just listen to what Anna's doing. He'd be like, that rhythm, it just, you know what I mean? James, you know what I mean? She was that on it. She was so prepared when we came in, and she freaking killed it. She is a true professional, and she's only 19 years old. It's crazy.
Wow. Well, I feel like I have to point out that all of you are professionals in that show for putting on a production in 5 days, and like the rehearsal process.
I think it's like 8 days or 9 days, you know what I mean? But still, it's very short.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And it's a huge deal performing at New York City Center. So
very cool. And the venue's gorgeous. I mean, it looks like some sort of beautiful church or a mosque or I don't know. It's stunning.
It
I
does.
think it actually used to be like a Masonic temple or something like that back in the day. I don't know. I might have just put my foot in my mouth and been totally wrong, but I think I heard that at some point.
No, the design is stunning. I looked up a picture last night and I was like, whoa, this is gorgeous. Mm-hmm. So I want to kind of like go back and ask, when was the moment that you realized that you wanted to be a theater performer?
And that's really interesting. Go ahead. Was there more? Sorry.
And what was the first show that you like saw when you were like, wow, this is a thing?
Oh, interesting. I'm not sure I ever saw a show as a kid where I was like that. You know what? That is not true. I think I kind of I got into choir first, and I didn't get into it until I was like 16. And because until then I was it hadn't really occurred to me. I liked singing when I was a kid, and then puberty shut me up really quick. You know what I mean? Because the voice starts cracking and you're like, no, maybe I'm not gonna do this. Right. And I just remember a buddy of mine heard me singing on the radio, and he was like, you should go out for choir with me. And I was like, absolutely not. I was like, I will be doing sports, all of which I'm horrible at. And my mom ended up being like, you're going to audition for choir. And I did. And thank God she coerced me into it, because I fell in love with it immediately. And so I knew I loved singing, and it was a show choir. So there was choreography, and I was horrible. There was a video of me in the back row, and I literally, every single time the group does a turn, I am the only one who turns the other way. Oh with so much freaking confidence. You could feel it from the back row, but I am absolutely away the entire song. Yeah, it's really, what's the most impressive is that I was so in my own world that I didn't even realize that I was going the wrong way for the whole song. Anyway, very funny. But we took a trip, because I grew up in Arizona, right, in a small town called Bullhead City. We took a trip over to see a show at Tuacahn. So the whole choir, it's a really wonderful regional theater out in Salt Lake, Utah. No, not Salt Lake. Is it? I'm not sure. Somewhere in St. George, Utah, I believe. Okay. A beautiful theater, and they did Little Mermaid, and we saw Grease. We saw Little Mermaid first, and I remember I was just freaking enthralled. You know what I mean? Just by the scale and the production quality and the talent. It was like nothing I had ever seen. And when I was really little, like I saw Lion King in Las Vegas, and I saw Phantom in Vegas. So I had been exposed, but I think I might have been too young. to
Yeah,
appreciate it. And so I remember that, and I remember being like, oh, and so then the musical at my school that year was Beauty and the Beast, and I didn't audition for it because I don't know, it didn't occur to me, it wasn't on my radar enough. And their Beast had to drop because he was just dealing with other stuff, right? So he couldn't do the show anymore, and so somebody was like, oh, you should look at, I went by JD then. I went by JD until I was like 18 or 19.
Oh my gosh.
And they were like, you should look at JD. And so they had me come in and sing a song. They were like, do you want to be the Beast? And I was like, yeah. So then I did that, and there was no turning back at that point. It became my absolute obsession. So for the next 2 years in high school, I did both musicals, and I wanted to do everything. I did the lighting, I helped to build the sets. I was almost a monster. I was so obsessed with these shows, you know what I mean, and creating theater. And I actually miss that element of it a lot these days. Like, I'm very fortunate that I get to do this professionally, and I get to work in really wonderful atmospheres, but I never get to touch sets. I never get to paint a set. I never get to play with the lighting. And I really do miss that, because there's just a different level of pride. You know what I mean? Yes. When you put on the show and you're like, I made that too. You know what I mean? You're like, you see that crooked ass door back there? I painted it. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, so I miss that.
It's like special skills.
Special skills, sloppy paint.
Yeah. Hey, maybe someone somewhere will be like, hey, want to put that talent to use and do behind the scenes stuff too.
Right, I know, truly. I'm like, give me a bump. Let me just give me a bump and pay. Let me maintain the set. Let me reset the lights. So, I just not that I know what the hell I'm doing with any of it, but it was always fun.
What a cool first role to play. I mean, I know it was probably a little scaled back, but high schools put on fabulous productions of shows. And yeah. I feel like playing the Beast and doing a little transformation scene and stuff like that. How can you not fall in love with the magic of live theater from that?
It's definitely that kind of show, with that Disney magic element, you know what I mean? Yeah, it was really special, really special.
Yes, it's as magical as Wicked.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
In a Disney way. In
an even more Disney way. Yeah.
Yes. So I want to talk regional productions, because you've been in a ton of regional shows in the Arizona area specifically. Yeah. What has been your favorite regional show to perform in, and why?
Well, my favorite, there might actually be 2 or 3, frankly. It might, if I had to pick one, I would probably say Newsies, when I did it at Phoenix Theater, because it was my first time leading what felt like a large scale production, like a professional show. And that was really fantastic. Plus that role is so much fun. The payoff in Act 2 it's every scene is just payoff. So it felt so good to do every night and to tell that story. And it's just so empowering, you know what I mean? A bunch of guys shouting and jumping and punching each other. And oh man, we just had the best time. We were all brothers by the end of that show. And then I did Toxic Avenger in Florida. And I'm such a huge fan of goofiness and camp and being a weirdo. And Toxic Avenger is all about embracing your absolute weirdest side. And that was a lot of fun. I don't know if you know the show. It's just the hyper camp, it's based on a campy 80s, basically superhero spoof film about this nerdy guy who falls into a vat of toxic waste, comes out a monster with super strength, and he ends up fighting political polluters to save the planet. And so, yeah, I mean, it's inherently friggin' hilarious. And he falls in love with a blind librarian. I mean, it's just, the whole thing is absurd. Wow. It is, yeah, it's all absurd. And so I had so much fun doing that. And because I also don't often get to do roles that are fun and stupid and goofy like that, and all the singing is it's all that and which was so much fun to do. And then I did Daddy Longlegs just a couple years ago in Phoenix, and that was a 2-person show, and that one was a lot of fun too, because it was totally different from anything I've gotten to do. The guy I got to play, Jervis, is usually played by an older guy, but they let me do it. Fools.
You're yes.
Yeah.
I won.
I got it. Yeah. So they let me do it, and it was just fun because he was very much an extremely introverted, sort of very intelligent but no social skills very high class, period, turn of the century individual. And I had never gotten to do anything like that. And so that was really rewarding to get to do.
I mean, and on top of that, like a 2-person show, that's a whole other just like journey as an actor to go on. I feel like.
And I did it with my friend she's now a very good friend of mine, Katie Roden, who is absolutely phenomenal. So that was a lot of fun.
Is there something in any of the regional productions that you've done that has helped you like tackle theater now professionally?
Oh yeah, I mean, the regional theater is, it's definitely still professional theater at Phoenix Theater Company and all those. Yes. And so I consider myself really lucky because I actually, my formal education at Arizona State, I was a business major. Wow. And yeah, I was a business major, but I chose that path because I wanted to go to Arizona State where there were professional regional companies within the same city. So my whole thing was, well, let me go to school for this. So I've sort of got a backup plan and I've got sort of a more rounded, set of skills going into adulthood, and at the same time, if I'm lucky enough, my plan was to try to work regionally, at some of those professional theaters while I was going to school. And I was very fortunate in that I got to do it. Especially my last 2 years in school, I pretty much just did a bunch of shows. And so I would understudy, I would be in the ensemble, you know what I mean? And I think of that as my sort of college theater education, was just watching those older, more experienced actors, because they also would fly in a lot of actors from New York, and getting to like watch the creatives and the team, you know what I mean, for each show work. I learned such a great deal, doing that.
First of all, so impressive that you tackled business school and doing like productions of shows at the same time, because business school, not easy, I feel like. Lots of studying.
Not easy. Accounting, I still have nightmares about accounting class.
Yes, yeah. As I would, yeah, because I would be like, what am I supposed to do? Like math, numbers?
Yeah, no, it was tough, and especially when I was in a show at the same time, I just didn't sleep very much, and I got one thing I'll say, I got really, really good at like time management, because I would be like, okay, I have 3 homework assignments that are due tomorrow for this class, this class, this class. So I'd be like, all right, well, we have a 10-minute break in an hour from rehearsal. So I can go and I can fill out 3 questions on this homework assignment. And then on the 5-minute break, I can do this. And then on the lunch break, I can go and do this. You know what I mean? And I'll be like, and I'll get home by 11:15 and it's not due until midnight. So I'll have 20 minutes, it was that. But I'm really grateful for it. Is what?
Your brain never stopped.
Never stopped. Never stopped. But I was so lucky, you know what I mean, that I got to do that. And so I'd go to school in the morning, and that would always kind of feel like my day job kind of thing, and then I'd get out of class and I'd go and meet my theater people and all my theater friends at whatever theater I was working at that time, you know what I mean, and just have a great time.
But you're like memorizing lines and memorizing like the correct answers to like tests that are coming up.
Well, ideally, yes, but definitely not always. But I always tried. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, school is hard. School is hard. And then you add like something you love on top of that, and you're like, have to kind of like make a good schedule for myself.
Yeah, for sure. And I was really lucky. My family was extremely supportive. You know what I mean? They have been the whole time. So yeah, no, it was great. I would do a show and my family would come and visit, you know what I mean? And because they still lived in Bullhead, which is like a 4-hour drive away. And yeah, no, it was a fantastic 3 years.
Yes. So after school, you went to Nashville, I saw. So yeah. That's a little different than New York and like the Broadway stuff. What brought you to Nashville? Why Nashville?
It was actually entirely happenstance. I was so my high school actually has a concert association that brings like extremely impressive performers from around the world to my little town, of all places, of all different varieties, and they put on like 4 concerts a year, and they happen to be putting on a concert with these sort of like Broadway-esque leading men that just come together and like sing, you know what I mean, like a trio of guys called Tenore, and they're a group that toured around the world. And my school was like, hey, you're like an alumni who's pursuing, you should like come back and sing with these guys, just like as a fun thing. And I was like, yeah, that sounds fantastic. So I drove in for that concert that night, and I show up and I'm like, hi guys, I'm singing with you. And they're like, what? Like these poor guys just showed up, and then the venue was like, by the way, we're gonna have one of our high school alumni jump on stage with you, which I just know pissed them off, because it's like, they just want to do their show, and then here's this kid who's like, I'd like to sing show tunes with you. So, but they were good about it, and they let me sing This Is the Moment with them, and we had a great time. And then their lead singer, David Wise, he's actually predominantly a music producer out of Nashville, but he's used to tour with Denori, like to get his performer fix for a few months out of the year is sort of what he called it. And he, sort of just pulled me aside and was like, I'd like to work with you. And he was like, you have a great voice. And he was like, I think there's really something there. And he, pulled me aside and took me under his wing. And we started planning this album, and we ended up recording it at Warner Brothers in Nashville, which was very cool. And we also recorded it at a studio called Ocean Way. And it was, I know, it was like ridiculously ritzy. It was stupid, the scale of it. Like we had like a 53-piece orchestra and like a supporting choir. It was nuts, and I was like, just, there were stars in my eyes like the whole time, and it wasn't any original music, but it was all like original arrangements of songs. So we took like Elvis Presley's Can't Help Falling in Love and made it like an up-tempo swing jazz piece, like a big band jazz piece, and it was really cool, that everybody was extraordinarily talented. And so I got to do that, and we recorded and we released the album. And then I did concerts off and on for about a year, pretty much all in like the Southwest region of the country, because that was where all my like networking was. And I did that, and I would like supplement with like regional productions in between the concerts and stuff like that. And yeah, and then I booked a national tour. I booked Les Mis, and so I left for that. And then one thing led to another, and I've just kind of done theater since then.
Yes. I was gonna say, you said that when you like originally walked into Nashville, they were like, who is this guy? But then they heard you sing, because like there's videos online on your website of you.
Oh, yeah, I guess there would be, huh? It might actually even be on mine now that I think of it. I'm pretty sure I uploaded that like years ago after it happened, or maybe they did. I don't know. But yeah, no, that's a really special video too. And you can see how nervous I was to be up there with them. I'm like, this is the moment. I was just petrified to be on stage.
Well, your voice, they were probably like, the second you started singing, like, oh, okay, so this guy's good.
Clench and pray,
So how did you get the national tour of Les Mis, and what is it like stepping into an iconic show such as Les Mis? Because like everyone knows what Les Mis is.
Yeah, no, I mean, and Les Mis was one of the shows that, first got me into theater. I feel like most people can say that, it's just one of those staples. No, it was very special. My casting was very traditional. I went in for an initial. It was actually one of the easiest casting processes I ever had, which was like shocking, because you would expect there to be like a bunch, and sometimes there are, for tours or Broadway, sometimes you'll go in 5 or 6 times and then not get it. But for this one, I went in once, and I was in the room for like 10 or 15 minutes. And then they called me back, and they were like, can you just come in tomorrow? And I went in one more time, and I was in the room for like 15 more minutes, and that was it. And so it was like so quick, and it's so wild, because you dream about it forever, and you go in for auditions so many times, and it never happens, and it never happens. And then finally, like the right one, you're lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time. And within 2 days, you've got that dream you've been going for, And so, yeah, no, it was great. And I toured with them actually only for a few months, which was like so bittersweet, because that's one of my favorite shows. But then I got a different job, and it was a larger role, and so I was able to leave that show and do the other one, which was beautiful, which was another show that's really dear to my heart.
Oh my gosh, yes, that show is fantastic. Speaking of, I was gonna say beautiful, but like that'd be a very corny pun.
Oh, hanging fruit. Oh, hanging fruit.
So, did you know going into the audition that you were a cover for Androras too in
Yeah.
I saw. Did you know going into the audition that you were going to be a cover?
I did. Yeah. I think when you're going in for like a cover track, most of the material that they actually give you is more about like the role you're covering than the one you'll be doing every night, right? So they had me singing like mostly Angel Ross stuff in that in that audition process, and not so much like do you hear the people sing and songs like that. But I never got to do it, which stinks because they were just to start rehearsing me when I got Beautiful, and we had to tell them, and so they're like, oh, okay, well, there's not really any point in teaching you, because they teach you your everyday role first, and then once you're in the show and you're doing it, they bring you in during the day, and they then teach you the other stuff that you cover. So I never got a chance to do it, which bites, but maybe someday.
Yes, one day, manifesting that. I could see it happening.
Manifest. Yeah.
So Les Mis, lastly, is such like a ensemble piece. I feel like there are main characters and like leads and stuff, but at the end of the day, I feel like there's a bunch of scenes that include the ensemble and like all the cast. What is the hardest part about a show like that, and like blocking a show like that?
Oh, interesting. I think the hardest part for me was plugging into a show that already has a full cast that's already like up and going, because there is just this inherent, like, everybody's already been doing it, right? So when the new guy comes, everybody's like doing the normal thing, but they're kind of like, what's the new guy doing? You know what I mean? And like, how's the new guy sound? And so because that's just human nature, right? And so I think that I just was always a little nervous when I was starting. And like my put-in rehearsal, you're the only one in costume. Everybody else is just in their everyday clothes, and everybody's there just for you. You know what I mean? So I guess it's actually pretty traditional to like bring in like cookies or donuts or something like that. It's just like a thank you to the company. Like, thanks for coming in for my put-in. Like you're having to rehearse all day today just for me, and there's also pressure of like, I don't want to screw this up. You know what I mean? Because we're only here for me. Everybody's watching me. So I would say that is actually probably the most difficult part of joining a show like that. And then like doing the show every night, it's probably just like the vocal stamina, because it is such a fun show, and like you just want to like let it rip, because it feels so good. But if you fully just let it go every single night, you're only going to do that show for like 3 weeks. You know what I mean? And then you're going to be like, do you hear the people sing?
Well, it's kind of like on another spectrum of Newsies, I feel like, because it's just like a bunch of guys just like,
yeah, like
yeah,
right.
It's a
lot of like hoorah, rah, rah.
Yeah, it's just a little more depressing.
Just a little less Disney. A little more Black Plague, a little less Disney, a little darker.
Yes, a little darker, just a smidge. So with Beautiful, you played Jerry Beautiful. So I want to talk what goes into researching a real life character in a show.
What's interesting? Yeah, sorry, go ahead. I cut you off again. Sorry.
No, and how do you go on stage and make that character, that like real life character you're playing, your own? Because it is a show that ran for many performances.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting because I consider myself lucky, because compared to like Carole and the actresses who've played Carole, there's much less pressure on the guy who plays Jerry, because Carole she has such an iconic look, you know what I mean? And the way she carries herself, everybody just knows her very well. But there's actually very little literature and very few interviews about Jerry Goffin. So I feel like the Jerrys are much freer to sort of just do what they want with it, or what sort of comes naturally to them. And I did, like, I researched the few interviews that I could find just to get a sense of like, what was his energy? How did he sort of conduct himself? And then, Jerry's, the biggest challenge with that role is the mental illnesses that he struggled with. And back then it wasn't something people addressed. They didn't have the verbiage for it. They didn't know the things that we know now, and they didn't talk about it. So they're not entirely sure of what all of his diagnoses would have been. Well, all of his diagnoses would have been, but I tried to research things like bipolar disorder and manic depressive disorder, certain things like that, because you want to try to do that person justice and not make a caricature of it, and you want to try to do it as accurately as you can, you know what I mean, just out of respect. And so there was definitely a small added pressure of that, the fact that he was a real person. But again, I was lucky because Carole, everybody knows Carole King, what she looks like, what she sounds like. Not so much with Jerry Goffin. So
But you're playing a three-dimensional character, so I mean that must be equally like terrifying and very fun as an
It is.
actor step into that.
Yeah, and it is a lot of fun. And Doug McGrath's book for Beautiful is actually like one of my favorite scripts because it's so quick and concise and clever, like a sitcom. But but then when you get to the heavier, more dramatic moments, which is pretty much all Jerry's part in the show. I mean, he is the conflict in the show for the most part. He is the antagonist. Like it is so real. The dialogue just it just flows so naturally. You know what I mean? Which helps so much. And there were a lot of times on stage where I remember some of us saying, like, it doesn't even really feel like theater. It almost feels like acting out a movie, but with an audience watching, because it is so simple and it's directed like, sometimes theater can be so grand and big, but they wanted it just stand in your spot and say your lines like a human, which was really hard actually for me. Like, I had never tried acting anything that difficult. And I think I used to, and I'm sure I still do, we're all still figuring it out all the time, but I would just use like certain like tricks that I knew would work for me in acting, and those didn't pass in Beautiful because there's no music underneath a lot of the scenes. There's no big set or choreography to hide behind, you're just standing there delivering the story. And that was real scary to get used to, but I'm really grateful for it because it was a challenge every night and it made me a whole lot better, I hope.
Well, you're telling a real story, which is like makes it real.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. And the fact that, those things really happened. Yeah, there's definitely an element of realism there.
Yes. So before I get to a show that has all that Broadway spectacle, what is your favorite Carole King song?
Oh, my favorite Carole King song is probably On Broadway.
Oh.
Love that. Or Up on the Roof. I love that one too. Yeah. And
Oh.
the audience used to go nuts for On Broadway every night when the Drifters came out. Oh man. Yeah, I missed that.
What was your favorite part about like watching all the different carols? Like that like understudy and stuff for Carole, like play Carole and like be their own version of Carole.
Yeah, no, that's actually I love that question. I loved it. It was so much fun. That's one of my favorite things about getting to do jobs like this is seeing the different interpretations. And one thing that's just wild to me, but is just standard, is you oftentimes don't get any rehearsal with some of the covers before they're on stage with you doing it. And so sometimes you will have never worked. Like I remember like when I was in Wicked, Mary-Kate Morrissey, who's freaking unbelievable. We had met one time when she joined the company as the standby, where she's still doing that now. And we had met one time. I had never heard her sing. I had never seen her on stage. I had never heard her speak the lines. And then one night they were just like, hey, by the way, MK's on, and it's her Broadway debut. And so I was like, oh my God, this is fantastic. So you're on stage and like talk about method, because like you're genuinely reacting. Everything is so real because you actually don't know what the other person is going to do, and the same thing happened in Beautiful. There were both years that I did it, because I did it for about 6 months before the pandemic and then 6 months after. It was just incredible because everyone's interpretation was so different. And for a role like Elphaba or for Carole, the tone of that performer completely changes the tone of the rest of the show. You know what I mean? Like they set the tone. So it really special.
I mean, yeah, the show's circled around them, those characters.
Yeah.
So yeah. How cool to get to go back after the pandemic to that first. I didn't know that happened. I guess I didn't realize that. I was like, oh, okay. Cause I feel like after the pandemic, a lot of shows people like got like recast and like people didn't go back. But how cool.
Yeah, no, I was really hoping for it, for the whole pandemic, because I love touring. I love that lifestyle so much. And I loved touring with that group. I mean, that is the coolest cast I was ever a part of. Because we also, that tour schedule was so nuts that you're not just working together, you live together, because you're traveling sometimes on a daily basis. You know what I mean? Sometimes twice a week, sometimes 5 times a week. And so you wake up in the morning, you get on the bus or you get on a plane together, you travel together, you go to Subway together or McDonald's, because they're the only places near the hotel to eat. You go to sound check, you take an hour to go and sit and breathe, you do the show, you go back to the hotel and have a drink and you go to bed, and then you do it again the next day, and so you're together all the time, and it was awesome. So
Yeah, everyone on the tour are the only people that like understand the schedule.
Yeah, and it's nuts, and there were days where it was really tough, but I loved it.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine. So, Wicked, what was your audition process like for Wicked? And when was the first time you saw Wicked? Because I feel like it's a show a lot of people see like before stepping in. Had you seen it before?
Yeah, it was actually my first Broadway show that I ever saw, which was really cool. And I saw it back in like 2018 or something like that. And I loved it, obviously, because it's friggin' Wicked. And yeah, my audition process, I was on the road and I sent in a tape, of myself doing the material, and then they asked me to fly out, so I called in sick onto my tour that night, which I probably shouldn't be announcing publicly, but I just did. And I flew. He's laughing at me. Anyway, I flew from California to New York, and flew late at night after a show. I got up the next morning and did the audition. And you know what's funny? I left. This is just so informative about how little we actually know about what's going on the other side of the table, because I left that audition devastated. I was like, my voice cracked. I didn't feel like I was into it acting wise at all, like, because I was it just didn't go well. I hadn't gotten enough sleep, and they didn't even have me do all the audition material, which normally is not a good sign, because it means they just don't want to spend more time. They want to move on because they're like, okay, well, it's not a right fit. So I walked out of the room and I was like, oh man, they didn't even have me do the second scene. I was like, oh man. And you spend all this money to fly out, you buy a hotel room, all this stuff, so much time and effort, and it's the emotional investment that's the most difficult thing to spar with, because you can't help. As soon as you get that callback or that audition, you're like, maybe this one, you know what I mean? You're like, maybe this one. And it's really all you think about until that's over and done with. And I think some people are really good about leaving it behind. I'm not. I think on it until it happens. And so I had the audition, and they kept such a cool head behind the table. Like, normally I feel like you can sense like a lean in energy if they're really into what you're doing. And they were just very cool and aloof the whole time. And they were just like, okay, thank you. Can we do the next scene? Okay, thank you. And then a few weeks later, I got it. And it was funny because I didn't think I didn't hear. So I was like, oh no, I'm not going to get this. And then they were like, hey, does he have any videos of himself dancing? And I was like, well, yeah, but I was like, I'd have worked a lot harder on him if I knew you guys were going to see him. You know what I mean? So because I had like auditioned for like a regional production of Jersey Boys and a couple other things that I had already put on tape for other stuff. And so we just sent them those, and a couple of them are quite embarrassing, but we sent them anyway, and they were happy enough with it. And then, yeah, a few days later, I got the call.
You're like, the dance tape worked.
Yeah, I'm like, it was obviously the dancing.
Obviously. Yes. Yes. I mean, it just goes to show that I feel like I talk a lot about like how performers are like their own toughest critics, and like everyone is. But like I feel like you all, especially when you like get up on stage, you're like, well, this like 1 millisecond, I messed up, and people are like, when? No, I didn't.
It's so true. It's so true. I actually during Piazza, I was very self-conscious about a lot of things, and I was like this little vocal thing, and I was like, oh no, like I think I was flat on this note, or I think it was this. And then I had friends like send me like audio recordings of the show, because nobody talks about it, everybody does that stuff, and they sent it to me, and I was like, you can't even hear it from out there, you know what I mean? Because they're so good at mixing it and making all the sound blend together. It covers up so many little blips and sins, you know what I mean? So yeah, we are absolutely our own worst critics.
Yes. So I want to talk, what was your reaction, first of all, when you got the call that you were going to be Fiero in Wicked on Broadway? Like, that's huge of itself. And then
Yeah.
how long did it take to get like, especially the blocking for Dancing Through Life down? Because like, I feel like that's probably one of the more difficult scenes that Fiero has on stage for a while.
It is by far the hardest thing he does. It's also probably the hardest number I've ever done. Just because, I'm not a dancer. I can move a little, but the hardest part about that number is energizing it. without making it look like you're energizing it. And when you're not a dancer, you're going to be a little stiff because you're not as comfortable in your body and you're maybe a little nervous, and it's also the first thing he does. He comes on stage, he's got like 3 lines, and then he starts dancing, and then you're dancing for the next, like, off and on for the next like 7 minutes, because the next scene is dancing too. And of course he's in the middle and he's the focus. And the show is also on a raked stage. So you're also dancing on a hill, which you can't really rehearse more than like once or twice before you get on stage to do it. Then everybody's looking at you, so it's like, here I am, like this uncoordinated dude, and then I'm doing it on a hill too, just a recipe for disaster. But their choreographers and their dance captains were like truly sensational. And I think we spent, my rehearsal process was 3 weeks, and we spent the entire first week just working on Dancing Through Life. And we would only rehearse for like a few hours a day, because that's kind of all your brain can take with choreography and stuff like that. And it was just drilling and trying to explain the movement in a way that my body would understand, you know what I mean? And so they were so good at it. And it's also, it's very specific. That movement is intentionally funky and otherworldly. So it's kind of weird to get into your body. And I think they're very used to Fieros who aren't really dancers first. So they're used to adding that week on, you know what I mean, to give them ample time. And I'm very grateful that they did. And then we like staged the whole show in 2 days after that. Like everything else, like we covered act 1 in like a day, and then act 2 in like a day. Cause he's also, it's such a princess track. He's not in that much, but it's such a great role. Cause when you are on stage, it's all about Fiero, and you get this wonderful duet in act 2, And so when I got the call, it was really serendipitous because I was actually in Bullhead City, my hometown, because I was on layoff from tour. So I was like, oh man, I get to go tell my parents in person, So I was actually at a restaurant across from my high school too, which was also like so kismet that I would be like so close to where I started doing it. I'm just like sentimental and dorky like that. It meant so much to me. And so I didn't even get home. Like I got into the parking lot. I was like, check please, after I got the call. And I was like, I'll take a to-go box, thank you. And like got the to-go box, got in the car, and like called my mother and started crying, and then I went
sobbing probably too.
it was just like, it was unbelievable. You're like laughing and crying because it's like, holy shit. It's like, how did this happen? Yeah. And then I went home and I told my dad in person, and I've never seen him scream and cry in 30 seconds, like within the span of, like, he screamed and then immediately started crying. And I've never seen my father react to anything like that. So that was really cool.
You're like core memory unlocked.
No question. Yeah.
Yes. What was the day you made your Broadway debut like, and how do you prepare to make your Broadway debut in a show like Wicked that's been running for so long, is like arguably the most popular show on Broadway still?
I don't know if you really can prepare yourself, frankly, because it is just, and I'm always one to tell my friends, like, please don't come on my first night. Please come after 3 weeks. And of course they were all like, we're coming on your first night, so like everybody I knew was there on my first night. And it was a great night. What's so funny though is I got through Dancing Through Life, and I felt like such a hot shot because I was like, I did that. And it was literally my last little piece of choreography where I like dance around, I just like turn around Glinda, and then we just start talking. And for the rest of the show, I have no more choreo. On that last moment, I felt a little too cool. And I think I turned a little too far, and like the corner of my boot got caught in like a track, and I rolled my ankle and I sprained my ankle. And I just remember moving to the next position and being like, is it broken? Is it broken? And I was like, oh my God, you're kidding me. And I was just sitting there watching the scene happen. And I was like, wow, I cannot believe I am on Broadway for the first night and I just sprained my ankle after 10 minutes. And I was like, everybody I've ever known is here. All my friends and family flew in just for tonight to see the show tonight. And I was like, I cannot not finish this. I was like, I refuse to not finish my first show on Broadway, And so I came off stage like full body sweat at that point, like just pouring adrenaline through the roof. And they were like, we saw you limping. Are you okay? And I was like, oh, I rolled my ankle. I was like, I need drugs, please, drugs. And I was like, I need somebody to roll my ankle. And I was like, I need ice. And so I had like 5 minutes, and here I am, just like, it looked like I stepped out of a shower. I was so sweaty. And, they like wrapped my ankle really tight. I popped some ibuprofen, and I just went back out, and I just limped through the rest of the show and like toughed my way through it. But my adrenaline was so high, I like barely felt it. You know what I mean? And then I was out of the show for the next few days, until my ankle could recover. And then I just wore like a boot inside my boot for the next like month. And so, yeah, it was nuts.
The dangers of a rake stage, I guess. Yes. Wow.
Yes, indeed. That. Yeah.
I feel like people don't realize, just like when the cast of Wicked says, like, we're performing on a rake stage, this is hard stuff. I feel like people don't realize that you all are literally like doing everything, singing, dancing, running on a hill.
It is wild. And honestly, the scariest part is that the dancers are doing all the crazy stuff that they do. And like there are gaps in the stage that are like an inch wide in some places because there are grates and holes for lights and fog and movement and everything. So like you can get a heel caught in it, you can get a boot caught in it. Like it's so easy. And you just learn which spots to be careful of. And yeah, it's nuts.
You just have to watch what you're doing and know what you're doing, and you can't be like zoned out.
You definitely can't do that.
Sheesh.
Yeah.
So how do you put your own spin on a character like Fiyero that, I mean, people have been playing for years and years and will be playing for years?
Yeah, I mean, it was intimidating for sure. Because also, like, look at the people who have done that job before me. It's insane. Like really famous industry legends, and it's like, oh God, it's like now I'm, oh boy, here we go. But they're very specific about how they like the show done. And so it's really not. I remember sort of getting advice from a friend of mine who did the show before me, who was like, it's not your job to reinvent the wheel. It's your job to plug in and be as precisely close to what they want as possible. And that's just how a show like that works, where uniformity is what they value the most for the sake of like continuity of brand, I guess. Right. And so I don't know, I feel like there's always going to be some individualism because everyone's different, but I think one of the toughest things about a show like that is trying to like fit a round block into a square hole, if that makes sense, like as best you can, because they do know precisely what they want. And so the challenge almost, it's not really finding your own interpretation, but trying to melt yourself into what they're asking you to do. You know what I mean? Because it's very specific because they know what works, so.
Yes, and you get to like say funny lines. You get the comedy part too. So
Yeah.
that's always a always fun to like hear people laughing and at what you're saying, like the tone, experimenting with the tone, I imagine, of how you deliver something.
Oh yeah.
What is
Every
your
night. Go ahead.
Go. No, you go.
I was just going to say, what I will say, one thing that was really nice is they would give me the freedom. Like I learned after a while that on certain lines, I could change it every night and they would be okay with it. So especially on like the jokes and some of those moments, I would find different ways to do it. So it wouldn't start to feel like robotic or, you know what I mean? Like repetitive or boring for me. And because if it's boring for me, it's probably boring for them. You know what I mean? For the audience. And so there were definitely some stinkers. There were definitely some choices that I made. And I was like, well, I just did that in front of 2,000 people, but I would try to do it differently the next night and just see what happened,
Yes. What's your favorite Fiero line?
Oh, I don't know. I actually really like his line. Maybe the driver saw green and thought it meant go. It's such a goofy joke, but it would be fun to like, because the girls would always come in with like so much fire because they're all so good, It was just fun to like clap right back and be like, maybe the driver saw green and thought it meant go. It was fun to do.
And like see their reactions and play off of that. I mean, I feel like that line kind of like sets up the whole, like sets up everything from then on between.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it tells you who he is.
Yes. Right. So how does your as long as your mind change depending on who was on as Elphaba? Because I mean the dynamic obviously changes depending on like which actress is on as Elphaba.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that song's fun because there's really no staging for it. You're just on your knees and then they say act and they just say like interact, be awkward, like just do it, be romantic and awkward. And so that was always fun because it was really different every night. And that was by far the most contrasting part of the show, depending on who was on and what it was. And it was also just wild, like say when MK or somebody new came in and I, we would go and do it. It's like, I haven't met you, but let's go have this intimate experience in front of 2,000 people and tell the story. And so it was so much fun. It changed very drastically. And also the Elphaba kind of sets the tone for what that song is. She's the lead, it's her story. And one of the things that is directed in it is that most of it should be initiated by her, because it's about her now coming to a place in her life where she has the confidence and the drive to want to do this with him. You know what I mean?
So it's just it's watching like what your scene partner is doing the entire time, which is really interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. So I know that because I worked Arts for Autism that was held at the Gershwin Theater last year, and all the students
Cool.
came and saw Wicked the day
Yeah.
before, that you had a lot of fans in that from that show. So do you have a favorite stage door memory from being in Wicked?
Oh, a favorite stage door memory from being in Wicked. I do actually. I was standing out and I wasn't even at the stage door. I was just outside the theater. Excuse me. And this group of kids comes up to me and they're all wearing lanyards, so I was like, okay, well, they're clearly with an organization. And they, one of they're all like, oh my gosh, the show was so good, so good. And they're, one of their chaperones or teachers comes up to me and hands me this little sunshine, this little like sun pendant. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. What's your organization? What are you guys? And they're, gosh, they're called like the Sunshine Kids or something to that effect. But they were essentially, it was a group of children who have struggled with illnesses of some sort or have really struggled with their health. And this organization pays to fly them out so they can come and see Broadway shows. And so, yeah, when they gave me that pen and I almost started crying, because they were just all so happy and so moved. And it was like, oh my gosh, it was like, we do this every day and you forget that there are people like that out there every night. You know what I mean? It was just incredible. So I have that little sun pennant sitting on my bookshelf, and I love looking at it. Yeah, that was.
Treasure. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that makes me cry. That's so sweet. I mean, Wicked is such a special show in that like you're performing for a bunch of people who either A are obsessed with Wicked and have seen it like 1,000 times, or B, like it's their first Broadway show ever and it's their introduction to musical theater and they're just like seeing all of you perform on stage for 2.5 hours.
Yeah, it's very special.
So you're like making someone in that audience realize that they want to be a performer probably in every
Yes,
audience.
yeah. I feel like we get that a lot, which is always extremely special. Extremely special.
Before I move on from Wicked and kind of like wrap up, I want to ask, who was your first Elphaba and Glinda and Fiyero and like Bach and everything?
Oh, that I saw
Yeah.
in the show. Oh, I don't know. I think I saw Ryan McCartan was the Fiero when I saw it. I think it was Ryan, and he was very good.
Sounds right. And
And I think I might have actually seen Jenny DeNoia might have been the Elphaba that I saw. I don't know who it was. It might have been Jenna Claire. I don't know. I can't remember who was doing it at that time. It was long enough ago that I'm not exactly sure who the Glinda was. But yeah, those were the Elphaba and Fiero, I think, and they were phenomenal. I mean, the show was so good.
yes. Oh my gosh. That sounds right. And Jenny, how cool to see Jenny on.
I got to do it with Jenny, actually. I
And
did it with her like 5 or 6 times at the beginning of my contract because she was still standby for a bit before Alyssa took over, before MK took over. So that was really cool.
she like, I watched you perform and now I get to be in the show with you.
I did, yeah. I was like, I've seen you do this and now I'm doing it with you. It was really cool.
Love a full circle moment. So I want to manifest, what is on your Broadway bucket list show wise?
Ooh, my Broadway bucket list, a lot of things. It sucks that Phantom closed because I'd really love to play Raoul in that someday because I love that show. I'd really like to do Christian in Moulin Rouge someday.
Yes.
And I'd really like to do Billy Flynn in Chicago someday. Those roles sound like they'd be a lot of fun.
Oh.
I think that's also, there's this show now, New York, New York, which is really phenomenal. And I went and saw it. Colton Ryan blew my freaking mind. That guy is not even human. He was unbelievable. Like one of the best performances I've ever seen. And I was like, that's a role I'd love to do someday too.
I saw it when I was in New York like 2 weeks ago. Yeah, very good.
Phenomenal.
All good choices. I mean, and I feel like Les Mis in the future again, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it'll come back. It's Les Mis. It'll be here every 5 years,
Yeah.
until the end of time. But yeah, God, I would love to do that show again in any capacity.
And I mean, same for Phantom. I'm sure it'll be back soon in some form or another. It better be, I hope. I became a Phantom fan like this year, like a big Phantom fan this year. So I was like, ah.
That's good stuff.
Yes. How do you work on self-confidence in this industry? Because like it's an industry where you're going in for auditions, you're watching people like kind of judge you in person. And you, as I mentioned earlier, you're your own toughest critic.
Yeah, it's tough. You definitely have to have a thick skin, and I remember I always thought like, oh, well, once I get like a big job, like in New York City or something like that, like it's going to be different. It's going to be easy. And it's just not how it is. You're still a human being. You're still made of flesh and bone. And, we're still just as fragile as we ever were. For me, it's the people around me, like I just have to rely on them. Words of affirmation is a big thing for me. So I'm constantly turning to like my tribe of friends and family, like for support because I need it. Yeah, that's how I deal with it. That's how I do it.
Yes, the people around you always. So before I ask my last question, I want to ask, where can people follow you on social media to keep up with what you're doing?
Yeah, I have an Instagram, James D. Gish, D as in dog, Gish, like fish with a G, is my,
Amazing.
and that's kind of the only one I do. I made a TikTok just so I could like reserve the name James D. Gish, but I think there's one post on it with like 15 likes. And I think I have like 100 followers on TikTok because I've never, you know,
Hey, maybe people will be like, okay, we're gonna go like the video with 15 likes now, and
right.
then you'll have to make more. So lastly, is there anything that you want to promote, whether it's singing related or like something that's not Broadway related?
Something that I want to promote. Well, I'll say, I don't have a show coming up for a bit, and I can't really announce what is in the future just yet, but for the time being, I've opened up more slots for like teaching, because I really love teaching like acting through song and audition prep and just general industry advisement, so yeah, I'd like to promote that if more people want to come and study, because for the time being, I have more time on my hands, before the next project. And so I'm taking more students, which is always an extremely rewarding thing to get to do.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Where can people like find info on how to sign up?
They can contact me through social media, like on Instagram or something like that, or they can go through Broadway Plus. I teach on my own, and I also teach through them. So either outlet.
Amazing. And I'll put like links in the description below. And
yeah.
I mean,
oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Of course. And yeah. I feel like I also have to point out, even though it was a while ago that it was released, that you have stuff that's still out on iTunes.
I do. If anybody ever still goes on iTunes, my album So in Love is on there, and I'm a big fan of that album. So if you're ever bored and you want to hear some classical crossover music, go and give that a listen.
Yes, and your website is like very well organized. So if they ever want to like listen to videos of you singing,
yeah, there's a ton of
that there's that on there. And I'll post the links below in the description.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like, I can't believe you said this.
Absolutely. No, this is phenomenal. Thanks for having me. You've had a great lineup of people on the podcast, so I'm very happy. I'm honored to be among them. This was great.
Thanks for watching this episode of Backstage with Becca B. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Becca B Talks TV. Or for more exclusive content from this interview and more, you can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Backstage with Becca B. Make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, go ahead and give me a 5-star rating. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next time.